What if the bridges falling in Iran right now are not the biggest story? What if the real story is what happens after they fall? Before we go further, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it tells me you want more videos like this. Subscribe if you are new, turn on notifications, and share this with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening in the Middle East right now. Because most people watching the news have no idea how serious this has become. In the early hours of July the 9th, 2026, American aircraft lit up the skies over Iran. This was not a warning shot. This was not a limited strike meant to send a message and then quietly fade away. According to United States Central Command, American forces hit roughly 90 separate military targets across Iran in a single coordinated wave. Radar stations gone, missile depots gone, drone storage sites gone. And then came the detail that made military analysts sit up straight in their chairs. Iranian officials said the United States had also struck a railway bridge near the town of Akala in the north of the country, close to the border with Turkmenistan. Videos shared by Iranian media, later verified by international news outlets, showed the bridge damaged and unusable. Now, on its own, one damaged bridge might not sound like much, but in modern warfare, a bridge is never just a bridge. It is an artery. It carries fuel, ammunition, heavy equipment, and troops from one part of a country to another. When you destroy a road, an enemy can usually find another road. When you destroy a major rail bridge, you create a bottleneck that can take months to fix, especially in a country that is under active bombardment and cannot simply call in international engineering firms to help rebuild. So let us slow down and actually understand why this matters, because most coverage jumps straight to the explosions and skips the part that explains why this war exists in the first place. Picture a narrow strip of water squeezed between Iran on one side and Oman and the United Arab Emirates on the other. This is the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, it is only about 21 miles wide. And through that narrow gap passes roughly 1/5 of all the oil the entire world consumes every single day. Tankers from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and Iran itself all funnel through this one channel on their way to markets in Asia and Europe. If that channel is ever fully blocked, the shock to the global economy would be immediate and brutal. Fuel prices would spike almost overnight everywhere for everyone. Iran has known this for decades, and it has built an entire military strategy around it. Iran cannot match the United States ship for ship, jet for jet. Its navy is smaller, older, and less advanced. So instead of trying to fight a traditional naval war, Iran built something different. It built the ability to threaten the strait itself. Fast attack boats, naval mines, coastal missile batteries, and swarms of drones, all designed to make any country think twice before sending a tanker through those 21 miles of water. The message was simple. You do not need to sink the American Navy to have power over it. You only need to make everyone believe that shipping through Hormuz might not be safe. For a long stretch of time, the world learned to live with this tension. Ships were harassed, a few were seized, missiles occasionally struck vessels in the open water, and the world absorbed it. Insurance costs rose a little, shipping companies adjusted their routes a little, and the global economy kept moving. The United States responded carefully during this period, protecting convoys, shooting down drones, but largely avoiding direct strikes deep inside Iranian territory. Before we keep going, take a second and really sit with that number. 90 targets hit in a single coordinated night across a country roughly the size of Alaska. That is not something a military puts together in a hurry after getting angry. That takes weeks, sometimes months of quiet planning long before the first missile ever leaves the launch tube. Understand something else too. This did not start with the bridge strike this week. This war has been building since late February 2026, when a coordinated American and Israeli campaign first hit Iranian military infrastructure on a large scale. Since then, both sides have been locked in a cycle that keeps repeating and keeps getting worse. Iran threatens the strait. The United States strikes back. Iran responds with missiles and drones aimed at American allies. Then the cycle resets, slightly more intense than the time before it. What happened this week is simply the newest, and by far the most dangerous, turn of that same cycle. That careful balance is now gone, completely gone, and it did not disappear slowly. It broke apart in a single night. What happened in the overnight strikes was not improvised. 90 targets spread across multiple provinces, hit in a coordinated sequence, means someone spent a long time planning this. You do not identify 90 precise military sites across an entire country overnight. This was a plan that had been built, refined, and sitting ready, waiting for the moment it would be activated. Reports and geolocated footage placed strikes in places most people have never heard of before this week. Bushehr on the coast, Golestan province in the northeast, Sistan and Baluchistan in the far southeast, dozens of miles inland from the nearest port. Bandar Abbas, the city that sits closest to the strait itself, an airport used by the Revolutionary Guard, was reportedly taken offline. The traffic control tower at Chabahar Port, a facility that manages ship movement at one of Iran's most important harbors, was reportedly hit directly. Spread that out on a map in your mind. Northeast to southeast, coastline to deep inland. This was not a narrow punishment strike aimed at one target. This was a wide, deliberate effort to take apart the entire system Iran uses to watch, track, and strike at ships moving through the strait. And it did not stop after that first night. Days later, reports described a fresh wave of American strikes, this time reportedly hitting bridges in Hormozgan province, the province that sits directly along the strait itself, along with power infrastructure in the surrounding area. Iranian state media reported casualties from these later strikes, and Tehran vowed to answer by targeting infrastructure belonging to America's allies across the region. Legal experts quickly raised concerns that striking infrastructure with heavy civilian use could cross into dangerous legal territory under the laws of war, a concern that has not slowed the pace of strikes on either side. And then there is the detail that tells you the most about where this is heading, the railway bridge. Hitting a missile launcher slows an enemy down for a day. Hitting a bridge slows an enemy down for months. When a military planner puts a bridge on the target list, they are no longer thinking about the next attack. They are thinking about the next several months of the war. They are trying to choke off the supply lines that let an army keep fighting over time. That is not the logic of a short, sharp exchange that ends in a week. That is the logic of a long campaign, one designed to grind down an opponent's ability to sustain itself. Iran did not sit quietly and absorb this. Within hours, Iranian forces launched ballistic missiles across the region, and the Revolutionary Guard publicly called this the first stage of its response. Not the whole response, not the final word, the first stage. Reports confirmed missiles fired toward areas near American positions in Bahrain, the home of the United States Fifth Fleet, the naval command responsible for the entire Persian Gulf and much of the surrounding waters. Kuwait's air defenses were reported responding to incoming missile and drone threats. Sirens sounded in Jordan. Multiple waves of drones and missiles were aimed at Gulf states allied with Washington. The Revolutionary Guard released a formal statement warning that if American strikes continued, its response would extend to even more bases across the region. Read that phrase again. First stage. That is not the language of a country trying to end a conflict quietly. That is the language of an institution telling its own soldiers, its allies, and the entire world that more is coming. If you are finding this breakdown useful, this is exactly the kind of video where a comment actually helps. Type the word Hormuz in the comments right now if you understood why that narrow strip of water matters so much, and hit subscribe so you do not miss what happens next, because this situation is moving fast. Now let us talk about the machines doing the fighting, because the hardware tells its own story. On the American side, reaching targets that sit 100 miles inland past a country's air defense network is not simple. It requires either aircraft flying deep into contested airspace or long-range weapons launched from far outside the danger zone. Either way, it tells you something about how much preparation went into suppressing Iran's ability to fight back before the main strikes even landed. One aircraft deserves special attention here, the MQ-9 Reaper drone. Since this war began, dozens of these drones have reportedly been shot down by Iranian air defenses at a cost of around $30 million each. Do the math on that, and you are looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in hardware losses from this single platform alone, not counting missiles, fuel, or the value of the missions that never finished. The Reaper is not a toy. It flies for over a day at a time, carries precision-guided missiles and bombs, and feeds a constant stream of surveillance back to commanders far away. Every single one that gets shot down is not just an expensive loss. It is a camera going dark, a set of eyes disappearing from the sky right when commanders need them most. Iran targeting these drones so aggressively is not random. It is a deliberate strategy to blind American surveillance over the strait, making every future strike a little less precise and a little more uncertain. On the Iranian side, the ballistic missiles now reaching Gulf states carry warheads weighing hundreds of kilograms, and their accuracy has improved significantly over the last several years, thanks to Iran's domestic missile program. When one of those missiles lands anywhere near a facility as important as the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet, the physical damage almost does not matter. The message does. It proves reach, it proves capability, it proves that nowhere in the region is fully out of range anymore. Kuwait alone has reportedly intercepted dozens of incoming ballistic missiles and hundreds of drones since the start of this conflict, according to figures that have circulated in regional reporting. Some interceptions have not gone perfectly either, with a small number of friendly fire incidents reported among the aircraft defending Kuwaiti airspace. That detail matters because it shows how chaotic and strained air defense operations become when a region is absorbing this many incoming threats over such a short period of time. Every single interception, successful or not, costs money, costs ammunition stockpiles that take time to rebuild, and adds strain to defense systems that were never designed to operate at this pace for this long. Now put all of these pieces on the table at once. 90 targets struck in a single night, a railway bridge severed in the north, an airport taken offline, a port control tower destroyed, missiles fired toward Bahrain and Kuwait, sirens in Jordan, dozens of expensive drones shot out of the sky. None of these numbers describe a war that is winding down. Every single one of them describes a war that is speeding up. And here is what almost nobody is talking about clearly enough. This is not one conflict. It is three conflicts happening at the exact same time, layered on top of each other. The first is military. Missiles, drones, jets, and now infrastructure being traded back and forth in real time, with both sides demonstrating they are willing and able to reach deep into each other's territory. The second is economic. Every extra day this continues, shipping insurance for the Gulf gets more expensive. Companies start rerouting cargo around the entire region if they can. Oil markets get twitchy, and this pressure does not stay contained to the two countries fighting. It spreads outward to every economy on Earth that depends on oil moving through that narrow strip of water, which is basically all of them. The third is psychological. When the Revolutionary Guard calls its missile strikes a first stage and threatens to expand its response to more bases, it is not only speaking to Washington, it is speaking to its own soldiers, telling them the institution fights back and does not fold under pressure. It is speaking to allied militias scattered across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, watching closely to see if the center holds. And it is speaking to neighboring governments in the Gulf, forcing them to silently ask themselves whether the American security guarantees they have relied on for decades are still as solid as they used to believe. Think about the economic piece for a moment longer, because it touches every single person watching this video, whether they realize it or not. Before this war began, roughly 1/5 of the world's traded oil and natural gas passed through the Strait of Hormuz. When ships stop moving smoothly through that channel, or when captains start rerouting around the entire region out of fear, the effects show up everywhere. They show up in the price you pay at the gas pump. They show up in shipping costs for products you order online. They show up in the cost of manufacturing anything that depends on energy, which is almost everything. A war fought over a narrow strip of water on the other side of the world still finds its way into your wallet, whether you ever think about the Middle East or not. Three pressures, all stacking on top of each other at once, is what makes this moment genuinely dangerous. Far more dangerous than any single strike or single missile launch on its own. To understand where this could go next, you need to understand who is actually pulling the trigger inside Iran, because it is more complicated than most people assume. Iran's official chain of command runs through its supreme leader. But the actual operational control over the maritime pressure campaign, the missile launches, and the drone strikes largely sits with the Revolutionary Guard Corps. This is not a normal branch of the military that simply follows orders down a clean chain of command. It functions almost like a state within a state. It has its own intelligence networks. It runs its own foreign operations through affiliated forces across the region. It controls a business empire worth an enormous amount of money. And crucially, it has its own institutional culture, one built for decades around demonstrating strength and resilience under pressure. That distinction matters enormously right now, When missiles fired toward Bahrain within hours of the American strikes, those were not the product of a slow, careful decision working its way up through layers of civilian government review. They came from a military culture that has been preparing for exactly this scenario for years, one that has already pushed a lot of launch authority down to commanders in the field. This is why predicting what happens next is so difficult. In a normal military standoff, you assume there is one rational decision-maker at the top weighing costs and benefits calmly. But when an institution like the Revolutionary Guard has publicly told the world and told itself that this is only the first stage, it creates its own momentum. Backing down quietly now would mean losing credibility, internally and externally. And for an organization built around projecting strength, that credibility might matter more to its leadership than almost anything else, including the broader strategic risks to the country as a whole. Think about what that actually means on the ground. Field commanders across Iran's missile and drone units are operating under a public promise made by their own leadership, broadcast to the entire country and the entire world. That promise was not phrased as a quiet suggestion. It was phrased as a commitment. And once a commitment like that becomes public, walking it back quietly becomes almost impossible without looking weak in front of the exact audiences the Revolutionary Guard cares most about: its own fighters, its allied militias scattered across the region, and the Iranian public itself. This is a pattern history has seen before in institutions built the way the Revolutionary Guard is built. The pressure to follow through on a public threat can end up mattering more than the original strategic calculation that started the conflict in the first place. There is one more piece to this puzzle sitting quietly on the sidelines, and it deserves attention. Israel has publicly stated it did not take part in this particular round of American strikes, but Israeli officials have also made something very clear in the same breath. If Iran extends its retaliation toward Israeli territory, that restraint disappears immediately. That is not a small detail. It is a warning shot delivered entirely through words rather than weapons, and everyone paying attention understands exactly what it means. The moment Iran widens the map, the number of active fronts in this war grows immediately. This matters because Iran does not need to strike Israel directly to pull it into this fight more deeply. Iran has spent decades building relationships with armed groups across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, groups that could act on their own initiative, even without a direct order from Tehran. If any one of those groups decides this is the moment to open a new front against Israel, the entire regional map changes within hours, and the careful separation between this conflict and the wider region collapses along with it. Quick pause here, because I want to know something from you directly. Down in the comments, tell me honestly, do you think this stays contained to Iran and the Gulf states, or do you think this eventually pulls in more countries? Drop your answer below. Hit that like button if this video is actually helping you understand the situation better than the news is explaining it, and share it with someone who keeps asking you what is really going on over there. Now here is the question that almost nobody in the mainstream coverage is asking clearly enough, and it might be the single most important question in this entire war. When 90 targets get destroyed in one night, how much of that destruction is actually permanent? Iran has not had months to prepare for an American air campaign. It has had decades. Facilities have been hardened. Equipment has been dispersed across the country rather than concentrated in a few obvious locations. Backup systems exist behind the visible, easily targeted layer that shows up in satellite images and strike footage. So the real question is this: is the United States destroying Iran's actual core military capability, the stuff that is genuinely hard to replace, or is it mostly destroying the surface layer, the visible equipment sitting out in the open, while the real backbone of Iran's capability sits hidden and untouched underground or in reserve? Nobody outside a small circle of intelligence officials knows the full answer to that yet, and that uncertainty alone is a big part of why this conflict is so hard to predict. Both sides may be operating with a distorted picture of how much damage has actually been done, which is exactly the kind of situation where serious miscalculation becomes possible. This is not a new problem in warfare, but it becomes far more dangerous when both sides are moving this fast and striking this often. Imagine Washington believing it has removed 60% of Iran's real strike capability, while the true number sitting in hardened bunkers and dispersed reserve sites is closer to 20%. Every future decision built on that gap in understanding becomes riskier than either side realizes. wars rarely end because one side simply runs out of weapons. They usually end or dangerously escalate based on what each side believes about the other's remaining strength, and right now, that belief on both sides is being built on incomplete information, gathered under active fire, changing by the hour. And that brings us to the moment that matters most in the days directly ahead, more than any single airstrike happening right now. It is not really about how many more targets get hit tonight or tomorrow. It is about one specific threshold. So far, this war, as brutal and destructive as it already is, has mostly stayed focused on military infrastructure and hardware. The moment that changes, the moment Iranian retaliation causes large-scale American casualties rather than equipment losses, everything shifts. The political pressure in Washington changes completely and immediately. And with a military culture inside Iran that has already publicly promised more escalation and pushed real launch authority down to commanders on the ground, the risk of that threshold being crossed by accident, by one decision nobody at the very top actually intended, is real. It is not guaranteed, but it is real, and every serious analyst watching this knows it. That is the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of the numbers we have talked about today. 90 targets, a destroyed bridge, dozens of downed drones, missiles landing near one of the most important American military commands in the entire region. None of this is the peak of the story. It is the setup for whatever comes next. The Revolutionary Guard already told the world this was only the first stage. History tells us that in situations exactly like this one, the most dangerous moment is rarely the first strike everyone sees on the news. It is the quiet, tense gap right after it, the moment when both sides realize neither of them actually built a reliable way